Today we talk about base training in detail. Hello legends and super legends, welcome to Veloharmony. In today's video I want to dispel some myths about base training. One of our super legends, our supporters of the channel, Wesley Stephen, has graced us with another great question that raises the topic that I think will benefit everybody. Wesley's one of these guys that purchased our the 8-week base training plan, and when he got it, he had not gotten into it too much. He said, wow, this is involved, and he had some questions about base training based on what he had read in other places. And what he said is that, would you consider adequate, he said, what would you consider adequate base mileage for base training? I'm paraphrasing. Or you suggesting quality over quantity? He said, I've read elsewhere that wants you to accumulate a base of about 1,000 miles or so by spring. And he said, if you have the time and see the value in doing so, consider a video on the topic. And so I thought about it and I decided to make this video because his last comment, he said, are you emphasizing the importance and benefits of structured plans versus focusing on base mileage? That raised a flag for me because it sounded like he was pulling base plans out of structured plan. A base plan is a part of a structured training program. Okay, so they're not separate. What is base? Back in the day, they would tell you, you need to get at least 1,000 miles in before you start doing high intensity workouts. That's what I've heard that's what he's talking about. Well, you can't do it by mileage. They threw that out there. They said 1,000 miles or so. It's based on the time you have. The time you have to devote to cycling is the time you have. If somebody tells you to get a certain amount of miles, that's not fair, because what if you don't have the time it takes to accumulate those miles in that period? So really what we do nowadays with training, and what I did when I was racing, we focus on hours. And even if you read some of my recommended books, like Greg LeMond's Complete Book of Bicycling, everything in there he does by hours. Hours make more sense. If you have an hour to ride on Wednesday, that's all you have. What you can do is you can try to go further in that hour, or go harder in that hour, because that, further means the wind's favorable, you're pushing at a certain effort, you're going to cover more ground, or the wind's in your face, you're going to have to push harder to cover more ground, if that is consistent with your training plan. So I have somebody I coach that has 5 hours to train. He only trains 1 hour on Wednesday, 1 hour on Friday, and then on Sunday he has more time to train, like 3 hours. So we have to use those hours and maximize the quality of the workout. Doesn't mean that he's got to kill himself. What it means is he's got to have structure that says, for that hour, you need to warm up for 7 minutes here or 10 minutes in this zone and stay in this zone for 50 minutes. Because a lot of people go out there for 2-3 hours and they're riding so easily because of the conditions, or they're stopping at lights or whatever. They might ride for 4 hours and spend 20 minutes in maybe zone 3. So you don't need a lot of hours to get in shape. What you need is focus. Let's come back to base training. Base training does not mean slow riding. I always equate that what I call long steady distance. But long steady distance is one of the workouts in your base week. So the plans that we built that Wesley got, the 8-week plan, we also have a 12-week plan. I will talk about what the significance is. The plan that he got, there are examples of workouts where one day there are days where I've set it up to where you're just on the indoor trainer. That's why I always try, everybody that wants to be coached by me, I tell them, get a trainer. Why? Because it gives you consistency. You don't have to worry about the darkness. You don't have to worry about the weather. No excuses. You're in the mood at 10 o'clock at night, you get on your trainer. You don't have to go outside. It's a hassle. Unless you got great lighting, it's hard to train at night. Let's be real here. So I have workouts, especially in the winter, for people who live in the snow belt. You can't go outside anyway. The roads are not safe. They're not, they're not clear. There's snow on the road. So you can get a better workout on a trainer. You might spend 45 minutes or an hour on a trainer and cover the effort you would do in a 3-hour ride, riding around unfocused. So part of your base is working on your endurance zones on certain days, but during that endurance ride, we do what we call skill work. Meaning, some days you will be working on big gear low cadence work. Some days you will be doing what we call spin outs or leg spins or rev outs. So there are specific workouts that you're doing within that base workout. And then you put that together on the weekend ride, which is your long, steady ride in a zone where I instruct people to spend a period of time steady in that zone, and then periods of time doing those similar workouts that we were doing during the week. So you're not just doing one thing because it's base training. What does that do? They're like drills. Like when you play soccer, you practice passing the ball and controlling where the ball goes. Same thing with cycling. If you never spin high cadence, how are you going to expect to do it in a group ride? If you never muscle a large gear, how are you going to be able to do that when you hit a hill or a lot of wind where you need to power a gear in the 80s or whatever? So base training is preparing you for the work to come. You're not crawling around. You're working. You're not hitting your top aerobic capacity zones, because this workout does not get you there, but it's not easy. It does not only stay in zone 1 and zone 2. You creep into 3 and sometimes what we call sweet spot. All of that's covered in my base training. So my base training is a workout to where I have structured rest days in there, and I have structured rest weeks in there, so that you come out of the base training stronger and not tired. Okay, so if all you're doing is riding around trying to get 1,000 miles and you do the same thing, it equates to, I'll use for example, there's a guy with Team RR that posted on there and said, oh, I already got 1,000 miles. And we messed with him and said, oh, you got more miles than us. And the people who are saying you got more miles than ours are people he can't keep up with. So it's probably confusing for him. It doesn't matter how many miles you ride. What matters is how you ride those miles. So Wesley, to answer your question specifically, is base training is preparatory training for future work. It is not slow, and it does not matter how many miles you cover. What matters is how much time do you have available for cycling, and are you maximizing that time? Because you can only go by the time you have. If you have not put in the hours and you try to do too much later, that's when you start cramping and pulling muscles and doing other stuff. That's really what it comes down to. So don't focus on the people used to say you need to get 1,000 miles in. That was just a gauge that threw out there. What they meant is you got to do some preparation before you start doing high intensity work. Now, you're living in an area, in your email you said until March, spring comes in March for you and the roads are closed. I'm sure a lot of people share that, people that are in Denmark and other places. Yeah, just because you're on the trainer doesn't mean you need to be going slow. You still need to have a focus where you decide, do I need to do more base work, or do I need to now start working on specific intervals that will prepare me to be ready to go in the spring? I worked with a guy called Abel Baget. We did the same thing. He lives in Norway. I don't think the road's clear until May there. So he was doing a lot of work indoors on the trainer, and by the time the summer came around, he was able to go and do the Etape de Tour successfully. So you need structure. Don't use the word base to mean slow. I don't believe in garbage miles. What are garbage miles? I know that comes to mind. Garbage miles are such that you should be doing zone 2 and you're out there like in zone 1 for 3 hours. And you spend no time in zone 2 or zone 3 or whatever your weakness is that you're supposed to be focusing on, whatever effort you're supposed to be. You're just riding around, sightseeing or whatever. Now, if that was the plan for that day, that's fine. But the reason why they call it garbage mile is if your plan was to go out there and do certain zones or certain intervals and you did not do that, all you did was pedal around, not paying attention to the effort that you were putting out, you wasted your time. That's what they mean by garbage work. You did not get a training effect. You worked out below the zone that would have caused your body to adapt to something new. That's what they mean by garbage. So now let's come to the 12-week training plan. Those of you who've been riding consistently for years on end, that you're active, the 8-week training plan is a good thing to consider looking at. I like to propose the 12-week training plan for those who have had an injury, a layoff, or are just new to cycling, so they can spend more time preparing. The the weekly plans change within those plans that I've built. The effort goes up, the duration changes. Every week is something different. There's a lot of mixing to prepare you before you get to the build and the peak periods. So it's not just taking the same week and extending it. Okay, the durations are increased, proportionally, because you don't want to go too quickly from 3 hours to 5 hours, So since it's winter and so forth, you will notice that in those plans, there's not a whole lot of demands on your time. But if you have more time, it's suggested in there on your road rides, you do more. Or if you're indoors and you want to do another 30 minutes, that's fine. It's not rigid. It's just a guide based on the time you have. But to get the training effect, the base hours start at 5 hours or so, and they build up from there. So I'm sure, people who ride, I'm sure you got 5 hours a week to devote to cycling. So to summarize, what I want to stress is that winter is the time for you to work on the things that you were lacking. So the base plan that I put together for people who want to do DIY cover generally the basic things you need in cycling to excel. Leg speed, what I call big gear, low cadence drill, so you can have variety and versatility. Speed work, there's a spin out workout in there that we tap into training your neuromuscular pathways to handle high cadences. We cover that. Now, once you've through that base preparatory and you have specific targets, those are the other plans when we talk about build and peaking that you need to focus on where you're hitting now your threshold and higher. Because even in the base training plan, later in the plan, we get you to come close to threshold. But in the build and the peak, you're going to be going up over and under threshold. That's where you get ready for the race efforts. But if you had not done the base training to where you were hitting your sweet spot, your tempo, and then your sub threshold, when you start to go over threshold, it would just seem to be such a humongous effort because you would not be prepared. So it's a gradual buildup when you do the base plan to get you ready for whatever event you're going to do. The people I coach one-on-one, it's the same process, but it's more customized for their schedule, their level, and their available time. And so these workouts are done based on the days that they have available. And we customize it based on their specific zones. These plans that I have, I'm looking into putting a bundle together to where if you have not done a threshold and you purchase the threshold test, it will be at a discount. I'm working on that. But the plans assume you've done your threshold test and you know your zones. If you don't, then you will really not get the value out of it. You need to know your zones. Otherwise, you're just spinning your wheels, okay? So base training does not mean slow training. Get that out of your mind. Base training is preparation for things to come. To that effect, make sure you keep getting your K's in.